Hey everyone, Kevin P. McAuliffe here for Lowepost.com, and I'm back again with the next lesson in our Conform series. And in this lesson, we're going to talk about taking our Premiere Pro timeline from Premiere to conform and finish inside of DaVinci Resolve. We're going to take an AAF file, export it, see what's going to work and transfer over in that process to get it into Resolve, and what we can then do to double check everything to make sure that all of our clips and the effects that are supported got to where we need them to be. All right, let's keep the introduction short. Let's just get into Premiere and let's get started. All right, so let's Command or Alt and Tab into Premiere Pro CC 2019. Now, what's important to keep in mind is that I am using 2019. This technique does work in previous versions, probably going back to pre-2017 with no issues whatsoever. Now I am working in a proxy workflow inside of Premiere here. How can we tell that? Well, you'll notice that I have proxies turned on over here inside of the program monitor. And if you take a look over here inside of my project window, if I twirl down my footage, you will see that I have proxies attached to all of the media that I am working with. Now this is strictly for working inside of Premiere. We will obviously be relinking to all of the 4K media once we get into DaVinci Resolve. Now what I've also done here is that I have come in and I have added as many effects as possible, ones that I am actually hoping will not be supported in the process from Premiere to Resolve. So let's take this timeline and let's export it. Now you will notice that I am exporting video only. What's important to keep in mind is that if you're taking audio and exporting it from Premiere, Media Composer, or Final Cut and sending it over to Resolve, chances are you're not doing your final mix in Resolve. Chances are you're sending that audio off to a post house. So really all we want is a 2-channel stereo reference file. Okay? Now, 2 ways that we can get media out of or get our timeline out of Premiere. I'm going to navigate up to File. I'm going to come down to Export, and you'll see that we have an XML export and an AAF export. Now we do have EDL, but to be honest, EDLs are very old. Don't like using that technology personally. I prefer AAF. Now keep in mind, the Final Cut Pro XML was never really designed to go to Resolve. It was more designed to go from Premiere to Final Cut Pro 7. So keep that in mind. Now you can use XML for export if you'd like to. Keep in mind, certain things supported there, not supported in AAF. So obviously your workflow is going to vary slightly based on whichever export method that you choose. Now, for the purposes of this lesson, we're going to stick primarily with an AAF export and import into Resolve. But what I thought I would do as just a little bonus at the end of this lesson, stay tuned to see how the XML workflow varies slightly and why it might not necessarily be the best option to go with. And one more thing before we move on, it's always imperative to keep in mind, are you finishing in Resolve or are you only doing a grade and color correction inside of Resolve, then sending that timeline back to Premiere to finish things up? If you're going to be doing that workflow, you're going to want to strip down your entire sequence to just its bare bones, just the clips that you want color graded, to send to Resolve, to then send back to add in all of the bells, whistles, and icing on the cake to wrap things up. That's why planning is the most important part of the entire Conform workflow. Now I'm going to select AAF. I really like the AAF export from Premiere to go into Resolve, and you'll see why in just a second. Now this window is going to get really complicated, lots of things we need to know in here. The only thing we need to know is that we're actually not going to select anything. We're going to leave everything exactly the way that it is right now. And I'm going to say OK. I'm going to be asked where would I like to save this AAF to. I'm going to send it to the desktop. We're just going to call it PP 2019. And I'm going to say save. Now the one thing that I love about exporting from Premiere, and it's funny, you'd think that this functionality would be in Media Composer as well, but it's not, is I'm going to say save. Premiere is going to prep the AAF and it's going to export it. The next thing it's going to do is it's going to give me an AAF export log. Now to be honest, a little bit hard to figure out what's going on in this window here. What we're going to do is just select it all and copy it, and I'm just going to Command and Tab over into a text edit page, and I'm just going to paste all that in. What this basically is it's a log of everything that's not supported in the move from Premiere to Resolve. I would take this, I would print it out, I'd have it on the desk beside me, as well as having information inside of Resolve that we'll talk about in just a second. Okay, so for right now, let's just hide this window, and I'm actually just going to say okay, and we're going to hide out of Premiere for now. What I'm now going to do is Command or Alt and Tab into DaVinci Resolve. Now let's get ready to import that AAF file. I'm going to navigate to File. I'm going to come down to Import Timeline. You'll see the shortcut Command Shift and I, Control Shift and I for all my Windows friends out there. I'm just going to select Import AAF EDL XML. And we're going to navigate to that AAF on the desktop, and I'm simply going to say Open. Now, as I mentioned in the Media Composer lesson, a lot of people just kind of look at this window, don't read all of the information, and just quickly say OK. Few things that I want to point out that are very important. The first thing that you can do right here, if it's not set correctly, is set your timeline resolution correctly. I already have it set to 3840 by 2160, which matches the resolution of our 4K media. Now, ideally what you want this to reference is whatever your deliverable frame size is. In my case, I'm just going with the same size as the 4K media, but if you were going to be exporting for, let's say, for the theater in scope, you'd want that to be 2048 by 858. So keep that in mind. As well as setting the master time code. This we're going to have match what it was in Premiere, which is starting from the 1 hour time code. Now I'm just going to draw your attention a little bit lower down. In this case, because inside of Premiere, we were working with that proxy workflow. However, we were still referencing the 4K media. I don't need to select link to source camera files. It's going to do that for me automatically. Now, normally by force of habit, I always select use sizing information, even though I know that clip-based parameter adjustments from inside of Premiere aren't supported in the move across by AAF to Resolve. But it's a good habit to get into to use that sizing information if you happen to be taking an AAF from, let's say, an Avid Media Composer. Now, last but certainly not least, you'll remember we just talked about having that text file printed out on our desk so that we can see exactly what's going on with any issues we might run into with the AAF. Well, we're going to double down on that right now, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to import log messages as markers. Now, these log messages are sort of, I'd call them errors, so we want them to be in red so they're going to stand out and be right in our face. Let's now come down and simply say OK. Now, you'll see that Resolve is telling me that 1 of 12 clips were not found. Do I want to select another folder to search? Now, you could do that if you want to, but to be honest, since we're not really quite sure what that clip is, I probably wouldn't do it yet, even though I do actually know what clip it is. All I'm going to do is just say no. What's now going to happen is I'm going to be brought to the log inside of Resolve that's going to look almost exactly like that text document that we got from Premiere, telling me everything that is not supported. You'll see the video scale and the video position is not supported. Plain clips will be imported in their place. Okay? Now, all I'm going to do is simply say close, and you'll now see that we have our timeline. You'll see our title is right here, and I'm just going to turn it off for right now by pressing D on the keyboard on both Mac and Windows. Now, you'll remember I told you that these clip, position, and scale adjustments are also not supported, so for right now, I'm going to turn these clips off as well. Now remember, we did talk about those markers coming and telling us about any problems that we might have inside of our timeline. Now, one thing that I normally like to do, making sure that every clip that's in here is the clip that we expect it to be, I always like to open the metadata information and quickly go through the clips in my bin to make sure that they are the 4K clips that we are referencing, so that every clip is exactly what we expect it to be, okay? Now, speaking of things being what we expect them to be, this timeline is obviously not quite where we would expect it to be because we'd expect to see these images here, let's just hit D on the keyboard to bring them back, being scaled down, positioned in the lower left-hand corner. We would expect this graphic to be here, but to be honest, I don't want to be command and tabbing back to Premiere all the time to see exactly what we had created. Well, that is why I came in and I exported a reference QuickTime. Now what I'd like to do is I'd like to bring this into Resolve, and I'm going to work with it one of two ways. Now I'm going to just Command and Tab back into Resolve for 1 second. Let's head to the media pool. And let's just import this clip. I'm just going to drag the window over slightly and just take the clip and just drag it right in. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. I'm going to head back to the Edit module, and you'll see that I have an empty track on video track 4. And here's how some people like to work with reference clips. I'm just going to take the reference clip, I'm going to take it, drag it, and drop it in here. Okay? Just like such. Now what we can do if we want to is come to the inspector, we can take this, we can scale it down, we can then position it wherever we'd like it to go. Now keep in mind, if you don't want to be doing all that dragging, all we have to do is simply come over here, turn on transform, and we can position this down in the lower left-hand corner. Now, because I know we got footage there, maybe we want to stick it in the upper right-hand corner, again, just to keep it a little bit out of the way. Now you'll see as I scroll through, it's a little bit hard to see exactly what's going on. Another option to make sure that all of your text lines up, let's just reset everything there, is to come in and change the composite mode of the clip to something like overlay. This is a great way to check things like timing, to check things like placement. But again, to be honest, it's a little bit stacked up and there's kind of a lot going on and it's a little bit hard to tell exactly what is happening. Okay? So here's what I like to do in this situation. I'm just going to delete that clip from the topmost video track, and I'm actually going to delete it from my project as well. Okay? Let's say remove, and we're going to head back to the media tool. Now you'll remember I took that clip from the desktop, I dragged it directly in. Not going to do it the same way this time. I'm going to head to my Macintosh HD, to users, to me, to my desktop, and there's the clip there. Now instead of again taking it and dragging it, I'm going to right click on it and I'm going to come down and I'm going to add it as an offline reference clip. Now you'll notice as soon as I do that, an icon has appeared over top of this clip. Now keep in mind, I can have more than one offline reference clip, but because we only have one timeline, we're just going to go with the one clip. What I'm now going to do is head back to my Edit module. Now the first thing you'll notice is that I do not have the ability anymore to take this clip and drag it and drop it into my timeline. So how do we work with this then? Well, let me show you. I'm just going to double click on a piece of media so that I get my 2-window layout going here. And what we're going to do with our timeline is I'm going to right click on it, I'm going to come to timelines, and I'm going to come down to link offline reference clip. And I'm going to select the reference clip that we just assigned on import, which is the Lowepost.com Conform from Premiere reference clip. Now, as soon as I do that, it appears as though nothing has happened, but something actually has happened. These two clips, quote unquote clips, my sequence and the offline reference clip, are now perfectly in sync. The only catch is that I actually just can't see it because I haven't told Resolve that I want to see it yet. Let's navigate over to the drop down. I'm going to drop that down and I'm going to select offline, and what you'll now see is I have those two clips playing perfectly in sync with each other. Now why are they perfectly in sync with each other? Because the clips have matching time code. So let me give you an example of where things can fall off the rails just a little bit. I'm just going to head back to the media pool for just 1 second. Let's come to our offline reference clip, and I'm going to come to the clip attributes. And what I'm actually going to do is just change the time code. Okay? Now, actually, let me just come back to the beginning of this clip just to make our lives a little bit easier here, okay? I'm going to come back to clip attributes, come to time code. Let's set the current frame's time code. And it doesn't even really matter what we set it to be. You'll see the time code jump down again. Let's just set it to be something crazy, like, 204. Let's not go 20. Let's go 02, 04, 03, 06, okay? And let's bring that window back up here, and let's say okay. Now, it doesn't look like anything has happened. But as soon as I head back to the Edit module, you'll notice that my reference clip has actually disappeared from the preview window. You'll see that we're actually back on the source. And as soon as I switch to offline, it's now media offline. Well, why? It's actually still there. The only catch is that because I changed its time code, it's now been pushed way farther down the timeline in this case than I can actually see. So if you ever get into a situation where you attach an offline reference clip and it comes up as media offline, it's because the time code of that clip and your sequence don't match each other. So to fix this, all we got to do is basically head right back to the media pool. I'm going to right click on this clip. We're going to come back to clip attributes. We know we want this to be 01, 00, 00, 00. I'm going to say OK. We're going to come back to the edit module. Let's come back, make sure we're on offline. We're now going to come back and everything is good to go. Again, like I said before, one thing that I love about the Premiere workflow with Resolve, especially when working with AAF, is information is key. You are the Conform artist. You need as much information as you can get your hands on. And just getting all that information on the export from Premiere to match it up with what's coming into Resolve, it's a great way to make sure that every clip and effect that is supposed to be in your Resolve timeline is in your Resolve timeline. All right, now I mentioned earlier I wanted to show you the XML workflow between Premiere and Resolve, so let's do that right now. All right, so here's the timeline we will be exporting as an XML file. Let's navigate up to File. We'll come down to Export. We'll select Final Cut Pro XML. Now keep in mind, we do have some effects on this footage that will not translate over and will be tagged and flagged with a warning to tell us that in just a second. So what we're going to do is call this from PPCC. I'm simply going to say save. In a matter of seconds, you'll see it switches over to the exporting FCP XML window, and then I'm immediately flagged telling me that there is an issue and I should check the FCP translation results report, which is saved next to the XML file, for possible issues encountered during the translation. So what does that mean? Well, let's hide out of Premiere, and you'll see on the desktop, not only do we have the XML file, but we also have our issues, our FCP translation results issues, where I'm being told that there is a tint effect, the BCC Gaussian blur, an alpha glow, a basic 3D, and a mosaic, but most of these are on the graphic. You'll see that we do have a couple on the footage. So let's just close this up. Now you'll see why it's imperative that you get that text document in just a second. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to Command or Alt and Tab into DaVinci Resolve. Let's navigate up to File. Let's come down to Import Timeline. We'll select that Import AAF, EDL, or XML. I'll select the XML file from my desktop and I will say Open. Once we're brought to the Load XML window, we want to make sure that we are using the sizing information. We'll leave automatically set project settings and automatically import source clips into the media pool. You'll see our timeline resolution is set to be the UHD resolution. And the mixed frame rate format is set to Final Cut Pro 7. Now, I don't have any mixed frame rate clips in this timeline, but if I did, this is the option that we would be going with. I'm going to say OK, and it's going to remind me that one clip was not found, that clip being the title. So it's going to say, do I want to search another folder? I'm simply going to say no, and I'm now being told, well, by the way, this clip graphic is not there. Okay, so I'm going to say close. I'm going to come up and I'm going to press D on the keyboard to hide this clip. And you'll see that what happens is that once we hide it here, let's just make sure that we are hitting D on the keyboard, which I was. A little odd that it wasn't hiding it there, but you'll see now what we have is this timeline looking pretty much exactly the way that we had it inside of Premiere minus our title, and all of that translated over. Now here's the issue, like I said before. The problem that we're going to run into real quick is that if I don't get that document that tells me all the stuff that's missing, you'll notice, unlike in the AAF file where all those markers were brought in to tell me what's going on, I actually don't have any of that. This is why that offline reference file is an absolute must. Whichever workflow you decide to use, whether you're going to use the AAF workflow, which I highly recommend for simple, straightforward, one-track cuts and dissolves, you're going to be setting that to Resolve to do your color grade, or whether you're getting into composites like what we have here, it's essential that you either have the information in that text document or that all of those markers are in here, because you need the most information you can possibly get so that what you have in Resolve looks exactly like what you had in Premiere. All right, now as always, if you have any questions, you have any comments, or ideas for upcoming lessons or courses, I want you to head on over and post them in our forums at lowepost.com/forums. And if you have any questions for me, you can always send them to kevinpmcauliffe@gmail.com.